Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy so that you have a better grasp on the deep, dark nuances of some of these things. And believe it or not all that hard to take into polite conversation with those who might misunderstand a tweet in the middle of the morning or anything like that. It's with that in mind, we welcome in Brian Riley to kick off this week's program. He is the director of the National Taxpayer Union's Free Trade Initiative. Brian, welcome to the program. How are you doing this weekend?
Hey, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Not at all, not at all. First and foremost, let's talk about why the National Taxpayers Union started a free trade initiative first and foremost, and then we'll get into some of the specifics of what you've been doing.
Well, thanks for asking that. Tariffs are just a form of tax. They're a tax on imports. And about half a year, 9 months ago, as candidates from both parties had been talking about trade in a way that made it sound like Americans lose from trade, we thought that there was an important opportunity to try and help explain that that's not always the case, that in many cases trade is a win-win, and that historically Americans have prospered when we reduce barriers to trade. I think maybe the best example of that is the 50-state free trade agreement we have between every state in the country, where just imagine how hard it would be to do business if Virginia could put taxes on imports coming in from Maryland and vice versa.
Which
really would have crippled our progress.
Yeah, which was one of the great problems in the the Articles of Confederation, and one of the things that why the Commerce Clause is such an important part of our founding documents. I suggest this with tongue-in-cheek to anyone. If you want to trigger a libertarian, mention that for the first time we have a president that has actually used the phrase zero tariffs, zero subsidies, which, if I remember my visits to the Cato Institute and other libertarian think tanks, is a libertarian hallmark, is eliminate all these barriers, eliminate all these subsidies. And it just sets them off, because the last thing they can grasp is that the first president to truly talk about a libertarian agenda regarding trade and barriers to trade and subsidies is Donald Trump. But it is true that he has actually said not just no tariffs, but no subsidies as well, which is an important part of the whole tariff discussion, isn't it, Brian?
Right, and I think that's a good point. And one of the things we try and do at the National Taxpayers Union is encourage good policies, and not just run around screaming about something that we see a tweet that we don't like, but really trying to encourage good policies. And certainly the goal of zero tariffs, zero subsidies, I don't think it's just a Cato Institute libertarian agenda, but most economists would probably agree that that's a good idea as well. One of the problems with subsidies when other countries subsidize, let's take China, for example, when they subsidize their industries, you could make an argument that benefits Americans because we get lower-priced goods. But on the other hand, there's clearly a fairness question involved, and it undermines the, I think, respect that Americans have for the idea that we play by the rules. Everybody else should play by the rules.
And we need jobs so that we have the money to buy the stuff, because zero money doesn't matter how cheap the T-shirt is. I'm not buying it if I have no job. So it is one of those things. But it's an important part of the conversation, and I meant no disrespect when I brought that up about the who might be for no tariffs, no subsidies. But I hear tariffs a lot without the subsidy side. You mentioned China, and so many of our trading partners, the subsidy isn't nearly as overt as it is in the United States. In some cases, it might be socialized medicine and a national health care plan, or it might be labor laws that are far different than ours, or straight up the government owns half the company. There are many different ways that subsidy takes place. So I guess it comes down to you have to determine what the cost per product is and make sure that that's equitable.
Well, that's exactly right. And let's not pretend that the U.S. doesn't engage in these kinds of practices, too. Anytime big companies looking at opening a new factory. They pretty much open up a bidding war between the states to see who can throw the most money at them to get them to come to their state.
Oh, yeah.
Thinking of Amazon, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like we're as pure as the driven snow, but obviously we do have, I think, a leadership role to play in promoting positive economic policies, kind of setting an example for the rest of the world. I think a good NAFTA agreement, for example, should be exactly what President Trump has said he's looking for, a zero subsidy, zero tariff agreement. But on the flip side, one day we'll hear that, and then the next day we'll hear, well, we're going to give farmers $12 billion in subsidies, speaking of subsidies, because they're being hurt by our trade policy and by foreign retaliatory tariffs. So I find that there are a lot of people who support the ideas of more trade, reducing trade barriers, and then I'll get in friendly discussions with some friends who think either President Trump's burning the whole thing to the ground, versus on the other side, he's shaking things up and is going to really lead us to reducing foreign barriers. And I certainly hope the latter is correct. But in the meantime, the U.S. has put tariffs on washing machines, on solar goods, on steel, on aluminum, on imports from China, and other countries have retaliated, even though, by the way, the president's trade advisors said no country would retaliate. They were totally wrong about that. So in the meantime, we're being hurt. I think the question is, I've heard some of the administration say it's just short-term pain. Americans have to do their duty and just suck it up, and it'll all work out in the long run. And if I had a little bit, I'd feel more confident if I had a clearer goal of where we were shooting for. But it certainly makes things interesting, and a lot of times it's just easy for people to they have an opinion of President Trump, good, bad, or otherwise, and that overshadows any of the details of the trade policy discussion, it seems like.
Brian Riley is the director of the National Taxpayer Union's Free Trade Initiative. You brought up NAFTA, Brian, and that's certainly the sun source of a lot of this. China has supposedly been making overtures regarding trade negotiations. European Union, we saw the president come there. But NAFTA has been at the table now since the Trump administration began. Where does it stand? What is it? Where is that going? And are you hopeful that they can get it done in time and that it will really look like free trade in between these three nations?
Well, I'm always optimistic that can happen. The scenario right now is that Mexico has just elected a new president. However, they have a really long lame duck period in Mexico before he takes office. So the existing administration in Mexico has an incentive to try and get a deal done. And it's been suggested that the new president probably would just rather have this taken care of and not have to worry about it when he comes into office. So it's a little bit complicated because what the U.S. would have to do is get a deal with Mexico with the current government, but then the incoming government would have to sign off on it as well. And then, I haven't mentioned Canada, which NAFTA is a trilateral agreement, so you'd expect that Canada would have to come along as well. So there are a lot of moving parts, and there are reasons. It's frustrating to me we didn't get an agreement sooner. Canada and Mexico would have been willing, I think, to really update and improve NAFTA. And the U.S. had some positions on things like we wanted a sunset clause, which said NAFTA will go away in 5 years. We wanted to reduce protections for U.S. investors who invest in Mexico and Canada, and some things that Canada and Mexico were never going to agree to, whether they're good, bad, or otherwise. And as a result, we're stuck while at the same time the remaining countries who are in the Trans-Pacific Partnership signed a deal. The EU and Japan are signing a deal. EU and Canada are updating deals. These deals are being cut around the world. And so one of my many concerns is if we're on the sidelines, to some extent, we could be left behind. And as other countries negotiate these trade deals, you alluded to it, each deal is different. And they might be creating deals that maybe aren't the free market types of agreements that we would like to see governing trade. So I'm hopeful that we can get a good NAFTA deal, but that's going to require a little bit of flexibility not just from Canada and Mexico, but from the U.S. too.
Is it awkward or is it difficult for the United States in the way we're constructed? We don't run our industries. These are private companies within our within our country. So that when we sit down to cut a trade deal with a country like China, where they own half of every business out there, that they really truly have an arbitrary control over all their exports, where we still have to go back to the companies that are building those and explain either I'm sorry, you can't sell as many washing machines in Beijing as you were, or cell phones, or whatever it may be. Is that a hang up, and does that slow down the process, Brian?
Well, it can slow down the process, and you just remind me that every country has its own unique political and economic challenges, and most countries, maybe China's not an example of this. Most countries, if there's a deal, it's got to get through their parliament or their legislature and get signed off on by the executive. So it's not that the U.S. can just sign off on something with another country without it being something that has political support on both sides. And the idea that, in general, people say, well, the U.S. and Mexico trade with each other, or the U.S. and China trade. Well, for most part, that's really an oversimplification. It's people in the United States trade with people in other countries. So if I buy a TV and at Best Buy and it's manufactured in China, that's not like somebody in Washington, D.C. is trading with a commerce executive in China and there's some master plan working this all out. It's the free market that works best. But what do you do when there are countries like China that do have so many state-owned industries and state involvement in the economy? And I guess my hope is that China is going to see the light at some point and realize that it's distorting the economy in a way that's not helpful to its own economy. And if you look around the world, every country that's prospered historically, globally, has moved in the direction of more free trade and more open markets and more economic freedom. China has been going the opposite direction, and that's very concerning for a lot of reasons, to go far beyond international trade.
Oh, yeah, and I think we've seen it kind of turn back and pivot there for a little while. It seemed like they were westernizing, and now they seem like they've doubled down. Talk about, is NAFTA, going back to NAFTA, Brian, how do you Canada and Mexico are such disparate economies. Yes, we all share a common continent, but can you come up with one trade deal that's fair to Canada and Mexico and the United States, or should we really have a trade agreement with Canada and another one with Mexico better to address the differences between these countries?
Well, I think sometimes individual trade deals can be better. Look, our free trade initiative, I probably should have explained what I mean by free trade, because it means that's a phrase that can be loaded, means different things to different people.
Sure.
It just means that you or I, when I earn my paycheck, I ought to be able to decide how to spend my dollars, and somebody in D.C. shouldn't be able to, based on who has the best lobby, say, oh, no, you got to pay more for steel, you got to pay twice the world price for sugar, and things like that. So that's what I mean by free trade. And so we could have an agreement that said, okay, zero subsidies, zero tariffs between Canada, Mexico, and the U.S., but each country does have what obviously differences, and all three countries, including the U.S., have some sectors that we carve out and don't include, whether it's the dairy industry in Canada, sugar producers in the United States. It used to be the energy industry in Mexico was carved out from NAFTA, and this is a real opportunity to integrate energy into NAFTA if we get the agreement updated. So I think there's certainly a way to have a trilateral agreement. If you can get an agreement with more countries, the nice thing is, if you're a small business in the United States and you're trying to sell to Canada or Mexico, you've got one set of rules. You don't have to figure out, well, there's one set of rules for Canada, another for Mexico, another for the EU. Probably that's one of the challenges if you have a bunch of little bilateral agreements, that it can take a lot of time to negotiate these deals. And I think there are strengths to both approaches. I remember when President Reagan was in office, he started the U.S.-Canada free trade agreement, and with the idea we'd eventually have a Western Hemisphere free trade agreement. And he also started the negotiations that led to the Uruguay round and the creation of the World Trade Organization. So I think it's probably a good lesson that we don't need to put all our eggs in one basket. And if we can do good bilateral agreements, we sure ought to do that. And if we can negotiate with willing countries who really believe in the same principles we do, then we should do that as well.
Brian Riley is the director of the National Taxpayer Union's Free Trade Initiative, and you find them ntu.org and look it up there. And Brian, I appreciate you visiting with us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. I was once told by a former Secretary of State that the issue facing the Obama administration was so frequently that our economy had remained so anemic that we had very little other international recourse rather than threatening military action, because sanctions and cutting off trade with countries was meaning less and less because our economy was not chugging along and people weren't as desperately interested in selling stuff to us through our stores and our shops. Is that turning around now? Is that an important part of the trade? The global trade is that if we have a strong economy, we have a stronger position to talk about things like human rights issues and liberty in these other countries?
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. And just in general, when we have a more prosperous economy as well, it reduces pressure within the U.S. to have trade barriers. It's kind of situation where the government starts picking winners and losers, because it's really easy for politicians when things are going south and they're not good to blame other countries for policies that often are made right here in Washington, D.C. And I could go down a whole list of policies under the Obama administration that I don't think were helpful at all to the United States. So we're I think moving in the right direction by and large with respect to tax policy and regulatory policy, making it easier to do business. And that the idea that other countries are going to look at us and say, not only, hey, that's a good idea, maybe we should do the same, but, if we don't go down that road, the U.S. is going to leave us in the dust. So I think that's helpful. I do hear sometimes people say, well, our economy is strong, so we can suffer through these trade wars better than other countries can. And I'm not as sold on that approach, because we might give them a black eye and they give us a black eye, but we still both wind up getting bruised.
Yeah.
And countries like China, they might get harmed more than the U.S., but we're a democracy. People are going to push back against these tariffs, and China has the ability to just ignore economic reality and potentially dig in longer than we can. I don't know how exactly that will shape out up in the long run. I do think, with respect to China, it really helps the U.S. to have good relations with Canada and Japan and Korea and the European Union, and try and encourage the changes that we all would benefit from in China. And it seems like we've been picking fights. But again, hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel, and there's a strategy to all this that will become clear soon.
Brian, do you sense at the National Taxpayers Union that there is a discordant relationship between the media's coverage of our international trade discussions and what's actually happened? I sense it. They'll say President Trump is a bull in a china shop and he's going to isolate the whole world, and yet here's the head of the European Union in the Rose Garden saying we're working towards a zero tariff policy. China calls and says we want to do trade negotiations. NAFTA is being renegotiated, and obviously all those things still in the works. We don't know where they wind up. But is the media coverage our listeners get on TV and the radio and the newspapers painting an accurate picture of where we are, or are we actually doing some good progressive steps towards better international trade policies?
Well, that question is far outside my area of expertise.
I'm sorry.
That I do think that with respect to trade policy, certainly that is my area of expertise, and it's really, and I can understand, but it's easy for the media to want to oversimplify things, put everything in black and white, and focus on the negative and ignore the possibility of anything positive coming through. Oh, he had this tweet. This is crazy. and focusing on that, and paying much less attention to the things like you mentioned with the idea of, hey, I want to have a zero subsidy agreement with the EU or with the other G7 countries. And part of that is I think they believe, well, he doesn't really mean this, so we're not going to cover it. And my perspective is he said it. Why would he say it if he didn't mean it? So let's cover it and let's try and encourage
hold him to it.
Those good policies.
And I think that's the example I often hear is the sausage making. You know, would you really want somebody showing you how the sausage is made if you really enjoy sausage? and sometimes that's where we are with this is the negotiating process. You jump in the middle and you say, well, that's horrible, and then something good comes out of it in the end. Brian, so what does the Free Trade Initiative at National Taxpayers Union you see as 1 year out, 2 years out from now as we approach his reelection campaign? And does the swamp, as it were, fight back even harder on these kind of policies that might crimp their authority over businesses either in their country or externally?
Well, I think in the long run, hopefully a year from now, we'll see that we've moved in a positive direction. One of the things with respect to the swamp in trade policy, I hate to say this, but it's the Trump administration's been a great administration for trade lawyers, as lobbyists are trying to figure out how to make sure they don't get hit with tariffs, and going to the Commerce Department and filing for an exemption to steal tariffs, while U.S. steel producers going in and trying to get those denied. And I think it's just not a good way of doing business. And it really, I was reading through the list of U.S. companies that were concerned about tariffs on goods coming in from China. And in many cases, these were intermediate goods that companies felt they needed to have access to compete globally, or else they might have to move to another country. And almost all of the requests were written on the letterhead of some big law firm in downtown D.C. Yeah. And so that's disappointing to me. But in the long run, hopefully this will encourage a move to more freedom and really more the idea that decisions will go back to being made by individual Americans around the country and not the swamp or politicians or bureaucrats in D.C. I think it's pretty clear that that's not the direction Americans want to go.
Oh, yeah.
But it's risky. It's risky. So I guess you might have to have me on 6 months from now. We can see where things are going.
Book it. You're booked for 6 months from now, Brian Riley, and certainly we don't want a K Street jobs program because you're right. That is the swamp. It's the swamp nobody even notices is there sometimes. But we do appreciate your visit. And again, it's ntu.org. And then click on for the Free Trade Initiative there. And thank you so much for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Well, thanks for addressing this. I know a lot of people are focusing on the court justices and regulatory reform and all these good things. So I'm really happy to see people focusing on the trade issue as well.
Well, yeah, we got to buy stuff somewhere. So knowing where it comes from and knowing that we have the money to buy it, with our wallets, that's important. And I don't think there's anything more important than that. Thank you so much for your visit, sir.
Thank you.
Coming up next, from the campaign trail, Congressman Dave Brat on this week's Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Hard at work on the campaign trail, less than 100 days now to the elections hitting the polling places. He is Congressman Dave Brat from Virginia's 7th District, getting a lot of ink in the Washington Post and on Politico. At least, in Politico, it's not his staffers telling tales out of school. So you take that to the bank, Dave. Thank you for taking some time out from the campaign trail to talk Tax Cuts 2.0. How are you doing this morning, sir, first and foremost?
Yeah, doing good. We had about 350 visits with constituents over the political cycle. Yesterday we were up in Louisa. We had meetings with constituents for a couple hours, and then went to Goochland and met with constituents for a couple hours. So we're getting around. We're sharing the good news. The economy's growing like crazy at 4.1. The unemployment's down, and now we got to make the personal tax cuts permanent.
Is that what
the Democrats said they wanted that? So we're looking forward to working bipartisan and getting that through for small business and individuals, making those low rates permanent.
Well, and talk about that. So that's is that in the pipeline? Is that already something that's being worked on? Because that's where I think a lot of people are looking at this saying, okay, this is great. I actually read a piece the other day that said it could go to 5.0. Some of the political economic indicators are saying we could get 5.0 GDP, which is amazing. Which is the amount of capital that hasn't been flowing before. So talk about what tax cuts 2.0 looks like to the individuals. Does it just make it permanent, or does it expand on it at all?
Yeah, it makes it permanent, and then we have a lot of consumer side benefits we're looking at. I was surprised to find out, happily, one of my bills for USA accounts, universal savings accounts, to help individuals save, was also put in Tax 2.0 as one of the lead bullet points. It was make them permanent, and then Brat's bill for these savings accounts, which lets you save $5,000 and your money grows tax-free. And the average American right now has a hard time, education, if there's a housing repair, emergency comes up, and the average American has about $500-600 saved. And so we need to incentivize that. And so this does that. Canada has it. Over half of Canadians love the program, signed up for it. And so we think the same thing will happen here. But, yeah, what you said is capital. And so the economy's growing at 4%. And then, the mainstream media and the Democrats, they said this could never happen. They said you got to get used to a new normal of 2%. That's what they all said. Larry Summers, Krugman, all these, hotshot economists were all wrong. And the Fed forecasts have been low. And now, boom, we're hitting it out of the park. And the capital formation is 7% growth.
Wow.
And that what matters there is we didn't just give a sugar high, right? We just didn't give some car rebate back or something like that. Yeah. This is capital investment. Every worker will work with that capital. Their productivity will go up working with that capital. Then your wages go up. That's already happening. And that's why we think this is a permanent, right? With JFK did it. JFK did supply-side tax cuts, and boom, the economy took off. So it's not partisan. JFK shows you how far the left has gone off the deep end.
Yeah.
JFK did supply-side tax cuts, was a proud Catholic in public, believed in national sovereignty, believed in borders, believed in the American worker.
He wouldn't recognize it.
Wage rates going up.
Well, but that's
the left has just departed from that mainstream orthodoxy that made the country great.
Dave Brat, 7th District, in a tight race. Everyone is saying it's getting, hair-thin trigger, and, of course, the politics of personal destruction. You've dodged that for a good bit, but it seems like guilt by association, so don't stay on with me too long, or somebody to say, he was on it with Joe Thomas, and he lives in Charlottesville, and we all know what it means to be in Charlottesville. But beyond that, you were talking about capital, and you mentioned wage growth, and it's one of those things the left, and especially the Democratic socialists that seem to be taking over the Democratic Party, and maybe you can score with the walk-away crowd, I don't know, but the wage growth is something nobody talks about when we have economic prosperity. That means there's more companies doing what you do, so unless you're the creator of the company, you're working for somebody, and if there's more companies doing what you do or needing what you do, they have to bid for you. That means that your value goes up, and then your wages have to go up.
Sure, exactly right. And then the temptation, and you see the left doing it, is people are saying, hey, wages are going up, so let's bring in a bunch of illegal immigration and get rid of borders and arrest ICE agents and get rid of ICE, who does all the internal enforcement that takes care of the drug problems, the human prostitution and trafficking problems. The leading Senate Democrat presidential candidates are making major moves to get rid of ICE. They don't want a border wall. My opponent doesn't want a border wall. And my opponent and the Democrats have no plan for economic growth that they can show you, right? They got nothing on paper. Whenever they're asked about policy, they say, well, we're going to talk about that up in D.C. I think people are fed up with the rhetoric and the talk. They want to see policies that work in the real world, and our economic package is working like crazy. And so we're pretty happy right now. We've got kids getting multiple job offers. African Americans, Hispanics are at all-time low unemployment records. Women decade-low unemployment rates. And so we got great news.
Well, let me ask you about that. Just saw a poll, I think it was a Rasmussen poll, that said in likely voters in black communities, the president's approval rating is up to 57%. Is this something, is this a sea change that's really got the far left panicked? Because after, 55 years of being lied to since the Great Society, the black community is leading this walk-away movement from the Democrats. And finally, somebody like President Trump and yourself are talking about, hey, I just want more jobs on Main Street in your town.
Yeah, well, that's I think they see. I mean, the left gives President Trump a hard time across the board, but no one calls him like a partisan Republican. And so I think the African American community, the Hispanic community look and they say, look, this isn't about political party. This is about my family's doing better right now, right? My church has got money coming in the coffers. My community is flourishing. He's doing solutions. We're fixing the opioid crisis. We're fixing the heroin crisis. We're fixing the trafficking crisis. Done, done, done. All these votes are done. Mental health, done. School safety, we're working on it and have put solutions in place there to improve our communities. Economic growth through the roof. We want strong borders. We want to help the rest of the world, right? Guatemala, Honduras, all their folks are coming here because they don't have free markets. And the left doesn't like free markets. Mm-hmm. So the left opposes the very thing that would help Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador have successful lives. And that's why everybody, of course, wants to come here. And that's why all the blue state people want to move to red states because we're better off and more successful and more prosperous. And that's why all the blue counties want to move to red county.
Well,
and the left is just everything the left runs, they bankrupt. And healthcare, now the Richmond Times-Dispatch did a write-up on the Obamacare, ending Medicare as you know it.
Yeah.
It's going to cost the Democrat program that my opponent is running on will cost $32 trillion. They will not tell you that. They won't tell you how they pay for it because they can't. California said no to it because they're already bankrupt.
Well, and that's the amazing thing.
You have to double the individual tax rate and double the corporate tax rate to pay for $32 trillion. So that's their policy. It would bring the economy to a standstill and put us into a depression. Not a recession, a depression.
So how is it that the Cook report is saying toss-up and Larry Sabato saying, your opponent can is it because she was a CIA operative and you've got the big state Republicans who are like, she's with the CIA and maybe they're wandering away? I don't know how this becomes even in question. You won re-election handily 2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, all the experts have been wrong. Every election I've had, they said I would lose, right? I mean,
that's
I'm
true.
kind of used to it. Yeah. They say you're going to lose, and then the left is energized, so we're taking the race very seriously, right? We lost some state delegates who were phenomenal people and leaders to unknowns from the far left that didn't even want the seat. They won seats, and they didn't even want to be in the seat. And in Henrico, one of the Democrats that won is already left because she couldn't get along with anybody. And we're so proud of the governance in Henrico. It's been the best, county forever. And now the Democrats are in charge and chaos. Mm-hmm. And then the CIA background, we don't know what her position is on foreign policy or anything because she has no policy papers. And so we're all finding out about Russia, right? It's the Democrats who goofed up Ukraine. Mm-hmm. It's the Democrats under Obama who allowed Crimea to be annexed. It's the Democrats who gave $1 billion to Iran, the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
It's the Democrats who did nothing for Korea or China or Russia, and they led from behind. That's what they called it. You can't make it up. Yep. Now we're leading from American strength like Reagan did, and you're seeing the change around the world. Countries are paying their fair share, stepping up to the plate. We're going to level the tariffs and bring them down to zero.
MIAs are coming home. MIAs
that's a win.
You got those MIAs coming home from North Korea, and then you see the protests on the streets of Tehran. I mean, that to me is the most seminal thing. Is all of a sudden regime change seems real in Iran.
Yep, you got it.
And from the inside, Dave, thank you so much for taking some time out with us. Get those yard signs. How can people get online and get your yard signs? Because it's a
make sure have everybody sign up for my email. I'm going to be writing policy coming up all of August now. Go to DaveBrat.com. Have all your friends sign up for my email list. Click on volunteer while you're there. and help me make phone calls, and we'll get you signs. But just please go to Dave Brat, B-R-A-T, DaveBrat.com, and get my emails because I'll tell you everything we're doing, and it's going to be exciting coming up.
DaveBrat.com. God bless you, sir. Happy birthday. We missed you last week for your birthday, but
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. Awesome.
We'll talk to you again very soon.
Thank you, brother.
Donald Trump wins the presidency.
So help me God.
They say he's killing America.
There will be a vote to impeach.
They say he's a racist
This was a white lash.
and a fascist. Who are the real racists?
Northern Democrats had conspired together with Southern Democrats to take away the fruit of other.
That is the theatrical trailer for the movie that everyone is asking me, how can we get this on a screen in Charlottesville, especially as we approach our August 12th reunion weekend. The filmmaker, it's great to have him back on the program. It's been a couple of years since we got together at Freedom Fest. He is Dinesh D'Souza. Good morning, sir. How is everything going with the movie? First couple of weeks out in the theaters that have it.
Well, it's going terrific. The movie's in 1,000 theaters, made $2.3 million in the first weekend. It's now in its first full week. And boy, it couldn't be more timely when we talk about the events going on all around us. The movie directly addresses these issues, not just of historical racism and fascism, but also white nationalism today. The question of where is the racism and fascism in America now?
Well, there are so many moving parts, and I am always want to try to oversimplify. I try not to, but at some point it comes down to when I meet somebody on the street, do I treat them like another human being or do I treat them badly? And it doesn't matter what makes me want to treat them badly. We just had a caller yesterday call into the program, had his car bashed in the driveway, all the tires slashed while it sat on his private property. What drives us to this sort of behavior towards each other? Because I just don't see, what logic a human puts into their mind that says, yes, my life will be better if I ruin this guy's car or bash the windows of his business, and who profits from this stuff?
So we have to a little bit of perspective here is really helpful because historically the Democratic Party used to be the party of the slave plantation. So we know who benefits from that stuff. The slave owners benefit, and they needed a political party to be their protector. That was the Democratic Party, by the way, in the North and in the South.
Yeah.
Now, after slavery ended, the Democrats were in trouble. I mean, there was some risk the party itself would dissolve and go the way of the Whigs. And the Democrats sort of needed a new kind of cement to hold the party together. Well, in the South, they came up with a big idea, white nationalism. So white nationalism or white supremacy became the central plank of the Democratic Party in the South. Now, when Woodrow Wilson, the first progressive president, played the movie Birth of a Nation in the White House, I mean, this was a movie essentially celebrating the Ku Klux Klan. And the reason that the title was Birth of a Nation is that from the point of view of the guys who made the movie, America was starting all over again. They did not like the America of the founding. They wanted to start a new America rooted in progressive racism, a term that we're not familiar with because progressives have kept it out of the textbooks. But progressive racism is the idea that racism is the way of the future. So I think all of this is the essential background to understand what's going on and how we got here. And then, of course, we can fast forward to the white nationalists today who are very much in that exact same tradition.
Oh, yeah.
Now, they are. Let me give you a few examples. We'll start with Jason Kessler.
Oh, well, yeah, our favorite here in Charlottesville.
Of the original Charlottesville rally, right?
Yep.
So this fellow, Jason Kessler, even though he called his rally Unite the Right, he has a thick background on the left. He was an Obama activist. He was an Occupy Wall Street guy. Now, this is on the Southern Poverty Law Center website, so it was actually known to the media at the time. But it was not widely reported. Why? Because it sort of didn't fit the media left's narrative. The narrative is that these white nationalists are all right-wingers. And, look, there they are. They've got their Trump hats on. So who can deny that these are right-wing Trumpsters? Well, I deny it. I deny it based upon a careful look at all the leading white nationalists. I do this in my book, Death of a Nation, that accompanies the movie. And I show that essentially to a man, these guys are actually on the left. They're not on the right. There's kind of a scam going on. And in the movie, I prove this by producing the poster boy of white supremacy, this guy, Richard Spencer. The fellow who's so controversial. When he went to Florida, they declared a state of emergency. And I exposed Spencer in his own words as a leftist who admires Democrats, not Republicans, wants a strong, centralized state, not a free market society, and on it goes. So there's a big lie going on, and it's about to be repeated. And so I'm very delighted to be on your show because I want to call attention to it in advance.
Well, we had it here, Dinesh, and I referred to it. We were live from the riots last August, and I came back from it and I said, this was Marx Brothers weekend. And I didn't mean it the comedic way. I meant Carl, the forgotten Marx brother. I said there were National Socialists in the park and reparational socialists in the street. And it was almost like Europe in the 30s again, fighting for which communist dictatorship was going to win out. And your interview with Spencer is just a wonderful tool to add to that legend. Jason Kessler dropped out of the sky, conveniently all of a sudden having a bunch of Twitter messages posted and never denied by one of our city councilors who many people didn't like his representation on city councilor. So what wound up happening is everyone who was against this city councilor all of a sudden wound up by default with Jason Kessler. And quickly, many of them just started flocking off of the reservation. But if you looked back, he had never talked about Charlottesville, never talked about West Bellamy or city council or anything city government wise before he all of a sudden mysteriously got, whether it be from David Duke or Richard Spencer or whatever, these text messages. But do we run the risk by giving them movies about them and talking about them on the radio? Isn't that what these guys want? When Florida declares Richard Spencer, causes a state of emergency, Governor Northam has called a state of emergency here in Virginia. It's almost like the Joker in that Batman movie with Christian Bale. Look at what I do. Just the rumor of me does.
Here's what's going on. I mean, there's essentially a very delicate and elaborate waltz, a dance that is going on between the white nationalists who are losers, who actually are marginal in our society, but they do crave notoriety and influence. Well, who's ready to give it to them? The media left. Why? I mean, I remember from Charlottesville at one point turning on, I think it was CNN, I saw a solitary white supremacist surrounded by like 24 reporters interviewing him. Now, obviously this guy was of no importance, but for the reporters it was like, wow, here's the poster boy of white supremacy. Here's the proof that white nationalism is a right-wing phenomenon. So these guys are happy to oblige the media left and cater to, if you will, the ideological script. But in reality, their politics don't fit with Trump at all. And that becomes really clear in the movie interview with Spencer.
Well, and you can see it. I think that's part of why Kessler and David Duke want to hold their White Album reunion party across the street from the White House, because everything Trump has done since he was elected has been contrary to what they believe in anyway. Dinesh, this has been the burning question, how do we get Death of a Nation on a screen in Charlottesville? Can I get a DVD copy? I'll hold a screening myself on Sunday. I don't know. But how can we convince, whether it's Alamo Draft House or the Stonefield?
Well, to be honest, I'll talk to our distributors. It should be in Charlottesville. I'm surprised it's not, and disappointed it's not. People should really get the book and the movie. I mean, I go through the individual white supremacists and the leaders. One of them, Andrew Anglin from the Daily Stormer. I mean, this is a guy who calls Trump a transvestite fag. I mean, these are guys who are not on the conservative camp at all. They denounce Christianity. They support identity politics. The only difference that they have with Latino nationalists and black nationalists is these guys are white nationalists.
Right.
Even white power instead of black power. So none of this is really conservative in any way.
No.
And yet it is so conveniently portrayed for the press. I mean, look, no one's ever done a survey that proves that the neo-Nazis or Ku Klux Klansmen voted for Trump. There's no such evidence. That's why the media needs these visual images of, three white supremacists in MAGA hats so that they can point to that as supposed proof for something that they have no proof.
Right. Well, as I said, at the time I said he could say it's Unite the Unicorns. Doesn't mean they all became unicorns at that point. You can call it whatever you want. Anyone can go and get a Make America Great hat at the store and put it on, and it doesn't make you a conservative. I see there's a petition on the website deathofanationmovie.com. I'll share the link out for folks to sign to try to get it on a screen here in Charlottesville. I was crestfallingly disappointed. I do have a copy of the book that after we're done, I'm going to give it away to a listener because I want at least some folks with the books, and you can get it at Barnes & Noble. But is there a petition trigger? How many petition signatures?
Well, I mean, let me tell people, if you do go to deathofanationmovie.com, that's the movie website.
Yeah.
You plug in your zip code, it will tell you where the movie is playing nearest to you. So you might have to jump in the car and drive a little bit, but this is an issue. These are issues of such overriding importance. I'd urge people to go. Yeah. Even if it takes you a little bit out of your way, go see the movie, pick up the book, and you're going to really be an informed and, in a sense, and you have your eyes opened, and you're now going to be able to watch this media tableau play out in front of you, and you will have decoded it in advance.
Well, it's playing in Harrisonburg, and I know it's not that far of a drive for folks. It is that is our nearest one. It's at the Harrisonburg Stadium 4, which sadly we have a stadium chain. I guess it's AMC or whatever here, but they didn't choose to play it here. But it is playing all through the weekend. So maybe that everyone's asking me, Joe, I just don't want to be in Charlottesville this weekend. So maybe this is the idea. It's a little road trip to Harrisonburg to see Death of a Nation there. Dinesh, it's an honor to have you back on. I want to have you back on again soon. If we can get the movie on a screen in Charlottesville, I'll pay for the travel and the hotel room, and we'll put you up in the best spot I can, or on my futon, whichever you prefer, and have you here in Charlottesville.
I appreciate it.
Dinesh D'Souza, deathofanationmovie.com. Thank you, sir. You have a great morning.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio for everyone here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. So long, and thanks for all the fish.